Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are thrilled to have you with us on what will be dropping the close to the end of March, our last one for March. So it's been a while since we recorded. Our spring breaks have come and gone, and we are in the back half of the semester now. Mentioning the back half of the semester is a little bit busy.
Yeah. I will say, Matt, I think you probably did the same thing I did. I'm going to speak for Matt, even though I don't know for sure, but we took real breaks.
We
Um,
took
and
real
I
breaks.
and I feel comfortable saying that for Matt because I emailed Matt or messaged Matt, and then like days later, I got a message that said, "Hey, sorry, I was on a cruise."
Yep,
So
yep.
Matt, I'm proud of you for taking a break. I am
Thank
proud
you.
of myself for actually taking a break, put it out of office, and just tried to enjoy myself as much as I could.
Yeah, it's healthy. It was the cruise
I
part's
needed it.
wonderful. I was completely without cell service or internet for more than 24 hours, three separate times, which is
Yeah.
just glorious. So,
Those are the things where like that sort of first couple hours you get that little twitch where you're like I need to check it.
yeah,
And then sort of once you like separate out from it you're like, "Oh yeah, no, this is actually kind of
yeah.
nice. I don't have to look at it. It doesn't matter. Nothing is going to nothing is going to burn down while I'm gone."
I don't know that I lose the twitch, even though I know what you said is true, but it's still very nice to in the morning. I have finished three books since the start of the
Congratulations.
cruise, so that was pretty fun. And I guess I will add is about the time before we get much further. What are you drinking tonight?
The weather is very nice. So we had false spring and then a shocking cold front that was I think you had the same thing. I think it snowed up
Yeah.
there. But it is back to being really, really nice out. Sunny, 60s. It's great. So I'm going with a ranch water today. Carbach Brewery makes a hard seltzer ranch water type drink with blue agave. So it's not a beer, but it's close enough. So basically like a seltzer. Prickly pear is my flavor.
Super. I think I might have had the prickly pear at one point.
They're really good. I love them.
I am having a Victory Brotherly Love Hazy IPA from Victory Brewing in Pennsylvania, Downingtown, Pennsylvania.
I should tell you about this. I went to a brewery recently. I'm trying to think of why I was in this area. Oh, I was at Liberty. I went to Liberty University to see Penn State softball play. Then on the way back down, I had stopped at the Beals Brewery. Have you heard of Beals Brewery?
I
It's a
think I've
pretty
had a
big.
Beals. Yeah, I think I've
They
had a Beals beer or two.
they have like a Beals Gold, Beals Silver, things like that. I did not realize that the brewery was sort of like maybe 45 minutes away. I had a flight. Every beer on that lineup, delicious. I was
Awesome.
so impressed. I will be going back, and it's a barbecue and brewery. Like as soon as I got out of the car, I smelled the smoke. I go, "Oh, this is gonna be good."
Yeah, yeah.
But it was really, really good. So I've had
Cool.
some good beers lately.
It was fun when we had our Nassau trip. I went to two different local breweries in Nassau.
Were they
So
the same ones that I went to?
they have to be. How many
Wait, wait.
local breweries are there?
Was there okay? So one of like I'm gonna look this up. Like Matt and I did not prepare for this.
One of them had to have been Pirate, right? Pirate
That's the one
Brewing,
that's sort of like on the water, kind of, right?
right off of the
Right,
where. Yep,
dark, sort of
yep.
low ceilings. Had like four beers on tap. Probably
Yes,
like 4 or 5. Was
yep.
the other one sort of away from the port, maybe like 15 minutes?
15-minute walk.
Small little place has like a canoe in the middle, and it's kind of like around a corner, so it's a little hard to get into.
I can't
Really,
remember the canoe, but I definitely remember around the corner. And I actually just walked over there. I called to ask,
yeah.
can I buy cans of beer? I didn't really want more beer at
Okay.
1 in the afternoon. And they said they sold me a couple cans of beer that I was able to bring back onto the ship.
Yeah, and it's like a relatively new local. Did you get like talk to the owner or something?
Yeah, yep,
So
yep.
the owner was there whenever I remember. I'm gonna try to find this while we're still in the middle of this conversation. I remember being really blown away that they had like some really good beers. I think they only like maybe they only had like a couple on tap. Like they didn't really have very many. I remember them having like maybe four. But I really enjoyed it.
I liked it. I want to say it's something like Dire Maker, but that's not that's the Led Zeppelin song, but it's something like that. I'll see if I can find that
I know
while
it's
we are talking. Oh,
we should have prepped this a little bit better.
we should have prepped it. I haven't entered those yet. I took photos though, so I could enter it. I was on the boat. I didn't have the signal, so I couldn't enter it at this.
Oh, wait, did you not have cell service in?
I did, but I brought them onto the boat to have it.
Oh,
So,
okay, I see what you mean. Okay.
and they let me take it. So,
Yeah.
well, while we're looking that up, cheers.
Either way, cheers, Matt. It was very good. I remember like the first time I went to the Bahamas, I had not had that. Like I'd only had the pirate one, the one that I think is like really close to the port area.
Yep.
And I remember like looking on Untapped and going, "Oh, um there's a brewery really close by." And then I remember going to it and like I really enjoyed it. I remember being shocked that I actually like liked it, but shocked in the sense of like, it's a touristy type place. You don't necessarily like expect really good beers
Yep. Yep.
just because they can make it a little they can get away with not being great. But I remember just being really surprised with it.
Yeah. The other one is Riptide.
Riptide. Yeah, okay, I just found it. That's the one. Is that the one you went to or no?
That's the one I walked to
Okay.
bring the two beers back onto
Yeah,
the
that was
boat.
the one that's like 15 minutes away. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. I liked them. I thought they were good beers.
All right,
So
well, so hey, maybe the Riptide person does not know this, because I remember being there and they were doing things where like it was a really great like the owner. I got to talk to the owner a little bit. It was
yep.
great, and it was something like she had said something like if you post a review on Google or Yelp or something that they'd give you free shots, and I was like, I'll post the review. I don't want a shot. Like I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm too old to be doing that.
Give me
So
an extra taste of beer, and I'll
yeah,
do
give
it.
me that little sampler. So I'll share that. Maybe this will be for both of us as like
Yeah.
our own
Yeah.
promotion. If you ever go to the Bahamas in Nassau for whatever reason, cruise or not, it's really close to the port. Riptide is what it's called.
Riptide and Pirate Brewing Company. I think
I
those are
looked
the.
it up on Google just now.
Yep.
Maybe this is the shot speaking. They have a 4.9 rating on Google.
It's,
It was great. I loved that. It was really great. It was a great place to
yeah.
do.
So, well, that's good. I'm glad you got some downtime. And for those not in academia, the second half of the spring semester is just total chaos. It's
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 people are
tough
trying to
to find.
graduate. You're trying to get ready for the fall.
Well,
You got to finish your
well,
own.
it's all of the events too, and they're fun events. I like doing it, but it just stays busy.
I, I 100% agree. We're in the planning of, I'm trying to get internships arranged for the fall, trying to get summer research programs, trying to get graduation set up,
Yeah,
and my classes still need to be doing stuff. So it's a busy couple weeks ahead.
it's a busy couple weeks. So today we have a topic that's somewhat timely. I mean, by the time this comes out, then there will be some news that's not completely timely, but it's a topic that lasts forever, a topic that's important. And we're going to talk about the principal agent problem. The Do you teach the principal agent problem?
I
I guess I'll ask that
No,
first.
I
Okay.
don't. I think I'll be honest, I probably should because it is such a these sorts of market failures are so common that I really probably should. And I just don't. I think it's just one of those I choose other topics instead.
Yeah, and you mentioned market failure. Gosh, I think it's probably a bigger government failure than a market failure in terms of the principal agent. Like government agents are supposed to be looking out for your interest. Well, first, before we get into that, so principal agent problem, there's a number of ways you could define it, but
Mhm.
the principal is when thinking in an employment relationship, the principal is the one who would be hiring an agent to act on their behalf. So the agent is supposed to be acting on their behalf. The quick Google definition: the principal agent problem is a conflict in priorities between the owner of an asset and the person to whom control of the asset has been delegated.
So, for example, like let's give a couple examples. Matt and I are saving. I'm gonna try to give other examples, because we're saving one that we want to talk about that is timely. Let's go with your business example. You own a restaurant. You put a manager in charge of your restaurant. The
Yep.
principal is the owner of the restaurant. The agent is the manager, and the hopes are that the person you put in charge is going to represent you and your interests. However, that person might not. The manager might do what's best for themselves and not what's best for the business. Or maybe like a lawyer, for example, would hope be representing you and trying to get you the best outcome possible, but maybe they're just trying to churn through clients,
Yeah.
and so your wishes don't always match with the person that you've hired to represent you.
Yeah, and I'll go to the restaurant because I think we can all understand restaurants. I will argue that the interests will always not match, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
And they
okay.
won't match in terms of, and some of it, it sounds harsh, right? Like, so an owner is hiring a manager and expects the manager to do what's best but something as simple as, okay, if there's an extra 10 or 15 minutes, the manager could go around and, ask customers if they've had a good visit and get some feedback, or, chit chat with the staff. And just, if you're a manager, treating your staff well is a big deal, and trying to make sure everything's going okay. Or you could sit and take a break. Or, you could scroll through your texts or something. Or if let's take it down a level. There's a manager and let's say hiring an entry level person at a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
Well, they can't give 24/7 supervision. So there'll be a time it slows down.
Mhm.
Surely the manager would prefer the cashier maybe grabs a wet towel and goes and wipes the tables down and
For all of our people who have worked in food services or anything close to it, you've heard that phrase. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean, which I think anyone working in
Man,
food service
you're giving me
knows that
PTSD. I
phrase.
think I had forgotten that. But
There you go. There's the principal agent problem, right? You should be cleaning, not resting
Yep.
instead.
And so certainly the client and a lawyer is a big one, but it's a pretty big problem. I mean, there's a pretty big problem here. And the question is, what types of incentives are needed to ensure that the agent does what the principal wants? And I actually teach the principal agent problem within game theory.
Okay.
And the idea, we don't go into too much of analytics on what to do, but the idea that there's a very major issue here with what's done, and ideas on managerial economics in terms of how does someone manage. Managerial economics is a little bit of a broader statement.
So you mentioned solutions. Maybe we should throw in a couple, at least in our examples.
Throw in more examples first before we get to solutions.
We can, yeah.
So
I mean, we could talk about why we're bringing this up now of all time.
We can wait a moment, but I want to bring up another one that I think is pretty big, and I think it's often overlooked, but it leads to a huge debate within economics. So Milton Friedman, I would say those who vilify Milton Friedman will often vilify him for a particular statement in a particular op-ed in the New York Times. And do you know, by me saying that, do you know what the statement is?
As soon as you said the op-ed in the New York Times, I remember something. I remember there's something that he did in the New York Times, and I'm blanking in the moment. Was this related to? This wasn't related to minimum wage.
No.
There was somebody. That was somebody else who had done an op-ed. And
the title of the op-ed: the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits.
Okay,
that's the title, and it's probably why he is singly. Those who try to vilify will often point to this to say, "Oh, that's just horrible." However, I want you to think about a public company and the principal agent problem. A CEO is the agent. The principal is the board and the shareholders. If you own a stock in a company, you have hired the CEO to make you money so you can live a little richer, so you could retire a little sooner, right? You have hired. The CEO is your agent. Should the CEO be advocating for their own social interests? Or should they be making money? And that's a controversial one.
Well, and I would say, especially given what's going on, the past 5 years or so, that has taken a renewed interest in the idea that businesses are doing all sorts of just different social agendas.
Yeah.
And then it comes back to this, that it's essentially something we've been fighting about for 50 years.
Yep. So that's very much, I think, a principal agent problem, in the sense that if a CEO does something that maybe isn't really tied to profits, I mean, a CEO's time is stunningly valuable, but they might get some nice press if they're doing something that's a particular social action. And I say this, and the social action could be on the left, it could be on the right politically, right? It could be either way if you're taking a particular action. I would make the argument, and I would make an argument that the CEO, if they are taking these actions and it's not maximizing profits, you've run into a principal agent problem here, where the CEO isn't doing it. That's an example I think others might debate on, right? And say, hey, there's other stakeholders and they should be listening to the other stakeholders. And that's a big debate, though, within economics. But I think CEOs and what they do, the board hires them on behalf of the shareholders in public companies and CEOs. That's a huge principal agent type issue.
Yeah.
So that's one more example. Do we want to get into solutions first, or do we want to get into the timely one?
Let's talk about solutions just briefly, because I think if we give the timely example, then we can sort of wrap it all together. We can talk about how that one is a principal agent problem, some of the solutions maybe that are trying to come out of it. Maybe it'll be really interesting. Maybe we can try to predict the future because economists do that so well on what's going on. So, I'll give you I'll say maybe I should have said this as like a very obvious, easy one. That another example of a principal agent problem, as one more last one, is like a football player's agent. Like there's actual like agents that exist, and I think we know about agents in that sort of agency space. But then so professional sports, right, is a really good example. You could think about parents raising their kids in the sense of doing what they think is in the best interest of somebody else. And so like exactly what we started with, there are so many great examples. I probably should be mentioning it at least. And now you got me thinking about what I'm gonna do in the fall. Is that maybe I should reconsider some of these to think about. I don't talk about asymmetric information, and I like that stuff's fascinating. Like I think I probably should. I just don't.
It's not like you're doing nothing though, right?
I'm not doing that right.
There's trade-offs.
There's scarcity and trade-offs and opportunity costs, right?
Yeah.
I have to give something up, and so I'm sitting here thinking, where would I squeeze this in? And
also I say I teach this. Remember, it's been game theory I've been teaching for a few years now, so it's
no, I'm thinking of like, what would I give up? And like I've got some stuff at the end that I don't necessarily love, but like I do like it. So I have a section on the end of my course is on topics of economics. So I do price discrimination, game theory, and then I talk about behavioral and consumer choice. So those are sort of my 4 last chapters. I don't love sequential games. They're fine. Simultaneous games are way more fun. But maybe I could squeeze out sequential games and squeeze in some asymmetric information, principal agent problem, those sorts of fun things. So solutions. How do we fix the problem of people not representing the other people the way they should?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is to try to set up, if you're dealing with a hiring situation, to try to set up the incentives in a way where all of a sudden the incentives of the agent are more closely aligned with the incentives of the principal. So so CEOs, for example, often will have stock options as part of the deal. So if they can spend their extra effort trying to make the company more profitable, to increase the share price, by increasing the share price, those options become much more valuable and they make a lot more money.
Right. And so it's almost kind of like the externality, like you're internalizing that potential cost, right? Like it's you want to lean, okay, you're not going to make as much money later. But if you do a little bit more work, you can.
And so for servers, like you don't think of a principal agent problem as much likely for, say, servers at a restaurant.
That's a good point.
Why? Because their compensation model is tips. And they lean more, they have fewer tables, or they provide worse service, and they likely make less money on their tips.
Well, and so that can be, I would say that's number 2. I think the second solution is always, I think, phrased as like contract design. Like how do you hire the people to do the things that you're doing? And in a sense, we hire the way that serving and waiting, at least in the United States, largely is based on tips. And so we've essentially created a contract with that person that says you will be paid in this method, and it incentivizes them to perform their duties with their own specific goals and things in mind.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of a nice, easy segue into the second one is contract design. Is you could try to write a contract to eliminate this, but that gets really hard. Like when you have really complicated jobs, like a CEO, it would be hard to write a really good contract that would get them to do exactly what you want, except if it said like it's tied to your performance and things like that.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. How do you document all of the things you really want somebody to do and to be thinking about in order to maximize profits? And the CEO really should have the expertise to know what are the actions that would be most likely to increase profits for the company.
Yeah.
And writing the contract, so it may exclude some of them. Some of the times you don't know. And in many ways, in my role as dean of a business school, you often think of, I've heard people refer to it as often I'm CEO of a business school.
Yeah, you are.
And there are things that I've done that have been big things that were not on my mind whatsoever when I took the job. Like one of the things that our team was able to get into place was this guarantee that every student could do an internship in a foreign country. Huge deal. No other business school does it. We weren't thinking about it at the time. And if there was something that was trying to say what I can and I can't do, would this have come up as naturally? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But in theory, right, you want the contract to be loose enough so that if you have an idea, you can implement it, even though it doesn't specifically say that in the initial contract design. So it can help, but contracts, as you say, things are complicated. It's a little tough. And that's why you mentioned at the beginning, you thought of this as a market failure. I've never really thought of principal agent problem as market failure. I've thought more government failure. Often, for some of the reasons you issue, governments can't try to internalize the compensation externality, to use the phrasing that you had used
Yeah,
about
no, so and I
internalizing
can
the
see
externality.
it. Now you got me curious if it's. I guess I've always lumped it in with the market failures because I think about it in the sense of like with asymmetric information, principal agent problem, in that moral hazard. I've always sort of lumped them in there, and now you've got me wondering if it's not. Right, but it's sort of the same idea of you are hiring somebody to do something for you, and which is normally what we put in any of these sort of as a market. Actually, I was Googling while I was talking. Wikipedia does list it as a market failure. So at least Wikipedia says it is, right? But
Okay.
I always think about it as this idea: you're hiring somebody to do something, and then we think about the typical market failures. That behavior generates an
Yeah.
externality, or they know more than you don't know, or you're hiring them, but you have market power, like that sort of space of all the right. It's not a government
Yeah. Yeah.
involved situation. So I will say, since I brought up market failure, let me at least give you the Wikipedia version of a market failure, since we are talking about it. A market failure is a situation in which the allocation of goods and services by a free market is not Pareto efficient. So I feel like there's more terms in there than possible. Basically, the idea of a market failure is that when you're buying and selling goods and services, you're trading with people, you're not reaching sort of the best possible outcome.
Sure.
So examples are things that you've heard me say already that I didn't define: information asymmetry. So one person knows more than the other person, principal agent problem; externalities, you're bothering or harming somebody else; non-competitive markets. So you think like a monopoly would be an example. Lots of other good stuff. So
Yeah. Public goods. Yep.
I've lumped them in there, but I've never actually, I guess, slowed down to think about if it was a market failure. So I'm
It's
glad
a
that
fair point. I can see how it can lead to a market failure, but I
yeah.
think it would be worse in a case where you can't have compensation schemes to overcome it, which you can't have in governments. So in theory, in a government, right, you're hiring individuals to do the task, right? The government
Yeah, I
agent.
think the government's like that. I could definitely see that. Like that is a market failure because of the way we set it up. But as soon as you put the compensation schemes in place, you are correcting the market failure of the principal agent problem.
Correct, and
Yeah,
you could correct it in one, but not the other. So,
yeah.
I can understand how it can be a market failure. I just have always in my mind, and right, this is
So,
probably my bias, right? I understand that, but
so
I
you're
have
saying
thought of
like
use of a
we need to
government
base
failure.
government pay based on the deficit, is what you're saying,
Well,
and
I don't know
then
about
we would
deficit.
solve that.
Our comments are going to be lit up if that's what we're going to put a short on YouTube of you saying just that, and we'll see what happens.
If well,
Um,
but I think that's all. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, though, anytime they threaten a government shutdown, people say, "Why are they getting paid when the government shuts down? If they're shutting down the government, they shouldn't be paid." And that's almost in that same. It's not exactly the same, but it's in that same sort of
yeah,
space of a principal agent problem at the government. They have an incentive;
but
they're going to get paid regardless of whether they shut down or not.
we're
So they,
veering so far off of the topic. But I love the idea, like the most talented people who really do care about earning a lot of money won't choose government.
yeah,
And in some ways, somebody who thinks the private market does amazing things, like part of me thinks that's fine, but part of me also wants a lot of super talented people in government, and there are a lot of super talented people who do work in government who they realize, hey, I can make a perfectly good living. I will never make the $500,000 a year salary kind of thing, but I can make a very good living and I can try to do good. In some ways, if somebody in a government can figure out things that are massively benefit society, I wouldn't object to them having $1 million a year salary. Now you run into a principal agent problem and an incentive. You run into a whole lot of issues figuring out who are the people who do this and
Mhm.
get the funding. But as an abstract, if all of the other stuff could be figured out, which I'm not sure it can, I would love for a way to figure that out.
Well, so
But
let's talk about why we brought up the principal agent problem now of all times.
yeah, and I will make a pitch first. For those who are listening who don't subscribe to Jadrian's Monday Morning Economist, you absolutely should.
Thank you.
fantastic reading, and the this is going to drop the last Thursday of March, and by the time this drops, you will have had an article out.
Hopefully, fingers
Oh,
crossed.
fingers
I plan
crossed.
on I while we're recording this,
Monday.
I plan on writing an article that we are now referencing as
Yep.
having been published. So
On
tying me to it.
real estate agents, there was a recent ruling on the commission's real estate agents have been charging traditionally, which is usually 6%. In some places it's 5%. And it sounds like that's going to be broken up essentially. And
Huge.
I have a lot of family who are in real estate and work really hard. I actually haven't spoken to them, but I'm
Mhm.
guessing this is going to be a negative impact for them, and hope that they're still going to be doing okay after all of this. But it's a big
Yeah.
deal.
So this
because
is huge. So anybody who has not bought a home in a while or is currently renting for a very long time, and I think at least for what I know, we're talking like decades worth of time. Essentially, that when you bought a home, roughly 6% of it, roughly 6% fee went to the real estate agents. So you don't have to hire a real estate agent, but man, it's really hard to sell a house without one.
Yeah, and some services aren't available
Yes.
to you.
And some
if you
services
don't
aren't
hire the
available, like
agent.
that, which is why most houses you have a real estate agent. So most real estate agents charge about 6%, half of that going to the buyer's agent, half going to the seller's agent. And so essentially, the most recent ruling is the court said that's price fixing. Even though it turns out that I will say I've sold 2 houses in the past couple of years. Turns out that was negotiable. They really don't talk about that being they did not talk about that being a negotiable thing, which is part of the problem. And so they're breaking this up in the sense of not having those fees. So you can still have a fee, obviously. So maybe back up. There can still be a commission, there can still be fees, but those are now sort of we're introducing, I guess the way they phrased it, introducing competition to the market. So if you're a real estate agent that normally charges 3%, somebody else can swoop in and say, you know what, I'm only going to charge 2%. And somebody else can say, I'll charge 1%. And so the hope is that it brings housing prices down.
Yeah, and in theory it should. Thinking through it, and I have the same issue with medical services, where so on real estate, right? Like prices aren't ever mentioned when you're thinking, what agent should I bring up?
Yeah.
When often in a good market, sometimes you would think, oh, I'd love to go to this steakhouse to get a great burger. And sometimes you're like, well, that burger for $15 would be tasty, but I'm okay with the $3 McDonald's double cheeseburger today. At other times, and that's competing on price. They
Yes.
don't often compete on price in that market. Medical market, I see the same issue. You often will go in for a service. How often have you said, well, how much will this procedure cost? Like the people doing it don't even know. At the end, they put some price on it. And that's not a general good way to run a market. It's not you will run into a lot of market failure or a lot of failures if you have markets where you cannot compete on price at all, which seems to be the case.
As an economist, so I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it I'll say it as an economist and then as a normal person. Sometimes those are the same people. Sometimes they're not.
Sometimes they're
As an
different.
economist, I am very excited to see what happens, right? I want to know what's going to happen to housing prices, what's going to happen to Realtor membership, are people going to start having like these bidding wars and get down? And then on the exact other side, I think about just as a regular person, sort of what you said earlier, right? Like there's lots of people who are real estate agents who knows what this is going to do to that sort of market in terms of employment. Maybe we had too many real estate agents before, possibly. But then I think about it also on the home buyer side is that there is a lot, and this goes back to if it's been a while since you bought a home, you may have forgotten. There is a lot of trust in your real estate agent. To find you good homes and to find ones that are in good neighborhoods, especially if you're moving somewhere that you're not from, to share that information about like your kids, your background, your family, your lifestyle. Your hope is that that person is and this is why Matt and I brought this up now. The hope is that the person you hire is going to represent your interest well, steer you towards houses that are within your budget and are in good neighborhoods and fit all your characteristics. I am really curious if that still happens in a lower price market. Exactly what you're saying about the steakhouse. I think that's a perfect example. When your real estate agent knows they're getting 3%, in some senses they can move fast, but at the same time, if they can sell you a more expensive house, they make more money. And generally more expensive houses are nicer houses. I worry that it turns into sort of a McDonald's type situation where it's how many homes can we pump through because we're only getting 1%. So let's sell as many homes as we can. We're not going to try to match you really well, but we're going to try to move them out real fast. I think about like the the stereotypical seedy lawyer who is ambulance chasing, just trying to get as many cases as they can.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's better for the market. So I
No,
think as a person, as an economist, I want to see. I think housing prices should go down. They're going to have to compete on prices. They're going to have to compete on reputation, right? Those are going to matter way more. But buying a home is getting a bad burger. You might get sick for a day or two. Buying a bad home could 2008, right? Like it could wreck a market if we are putting people
yeah.
not in the right homes. So I get very nervous on that side of it.
It'll be fascinating to see what happens on that. That was, I believe it was Freakonomics. I'm pretty certain
Yes.
Freakonomics had the discussion that real estate agents at the time were viewed as one of the least honorable professions.
Yeah.
And I remember my father was starting a real estate company. I told him, he got really upset. And then he went to a training, and the training people said, yeah, we're one of the least respected professions. And like, how do we fix this? But part of the issue in that, I believe they had the selling time a real estate agent would use when they were selling somebody else's house versus their own.
Yeah.
If they're selling somebody else's, they sold it quicker because they make a commission, and the commission varied, but it was still in their interest to churn.
Right. So what happens when you're going to make less money off of it? Like that's
So I would imagine, could it be a little bit more churn? There could be a little bit more churn. On average, of course, the net benefit to society is equaled out. Somebody's getting the better, if it's sold at a certain price, somebody's getting the better deal, somebody's getting the worse deal.
Yeah.
But those agents are supposed to represent the best interest of the seller. Although the conflict you get is sometimes an agent can serve as the interest of the seller and the buyer at the same time, which poses another principal agent
I'll
problem.
say every house I've bought, they very explicitly up front, they say, we don't do dual agency. So like,
Okay.
to be fair, I've only bought and sold 2 houses. But it was really interesting, like even to hear that, in the sense that like I had never even thought about that, like my real estate agent could represent both of us in that process. But I don't know. I imagine prices will come down. That if we're making predictions, I can make a very simple I think prices will come down. I can't imagine that all of a sudden they're going to suddenly start charging higher rates and stuff like that. So some of the house prices include the notion that there's a percentage fee that you have to pay. So, well, housing prices might come down, but I don't think it's not going to be meaningful.
Well, it would be, I would imagine, let's say the percentage goes on average from 6 to 4.5, right? Like the total percentage goes from 6 to 4.5. So on a $400,000,
$3,000 cheaper, like
let's say at a $400,000 house, we're talking $6,000 total, and it would be $3,000 each side. Okay, so if the $6,000 in the less commission, I would imagine maybe half of it would go to the buyer and half to the seller. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think it's going to make a meaningful dent in home prices. Like,
well, that's talking about. No, I don't think it's going to make a massive. I mean, to drop home prices, we just need to build, right? Like,
yes.
what,
yeah, but
like let's build more.
Yes, I think home prices will come down, but not a meaningful amount. I don't think it's going to be a meaningful amount. Like, I
think home buyers will save close to 1%, and home sellers will get close to 1% more,
right.
Which, given how expensive it is, that's meaningful. But this is a big deal though for agents. This is
I should say it as it's meaningful for the person who's getting a couple $1,000s in the grand scheme of a house. It's so small, right? Those are the sorts of fights you have at closing where it's like where they're negotiating. I've always found this super strange, and I think about it like whenever I hear. I'll share a side story too. It's these negotiations over really large amounts of money where it seems so dumb. Where you hear like professional athletes that are paid, 6.72 million, and I'm like, how did you come to that 0.02? Like, what is $20,000 when you're making $7 million? And I imagine that they're sitting there going, we'll pay you 6.7 million. And somebody else is like, no, we want 6.72. And it's just like, at some point, I'm like, just take it. Just go. You don't need that decimal. That's what I'm thinking about in the context of home prices. That 1% on some of these homes, you're just like, just sell the house. I just want to move. I want to get out of here. I'll pay one, I'll take the bullet. I just, I get very nervous. I get very, very nervous on like a home is a very big investment for almost everybody that buys it, right? And it's one of those. You've lived in your home for a while, right? I think you've.
Yeah, it's been crazy. The idea of moving again, and I know
Exactly.
you.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just so horrible. I mean, I
Exactly.
cannot fathom how awful it would be. It's been July 2006, so we're coming up on 18 years in this house.
Yeah. Exactly. So I get nervous about this idea of like when that it's gonna go so much faster, and that you were gonna be putting people in homes that are not necessarily good homes for them.
That doesn't make me nervous because a
I don't
person
know.
could choose to go to somebody who charges more.
They could,
They
but I don't
really
think they're
want
going to, right? Like if you think about sort of these exactly what you said, right? Saving a percent. If you have two people who have a good
to. Yeah,
on
I don't know.
paper have a
Like
good reputation,
I don't know. I'm gonna. I
well,
think the
they're
real
mad.
estate agents I know. I don't think they're going to
I don't no,
steer
right.
people wrong
The
anymore.
good I
Like,
think the good real estate agents are going to stay good. Absolutely. Right? There are good lawyers.
yeah,
Right?
but
Regardless of
I
what you
don't know
say.
that. Is there anybody who's good now and all of a sudden is going to be bad because it's 4.5 instead of 6% total commission?
No, I think what's going to happen is somebody who is not great, doesn't get a lot of business right now, but now can cut their rates and can pick up a little, right? They could pick that marginal person who wasn't going to get them before. But the idea is like, if I was going to pay the same percentage, I want the better person. But it's your McDonald's example. Now I have a choice of a good one for more or a bad one for less. I might pick the bad real estate agent a few more times.
You might. That's a very good point, right? You could have that.
I'm using your McDonald's
Yep,
example,
yep,
right?
yep.
Like,
Nope, I think that's a good point.
yeah.
The one thing I would say is the person who's really good as an agent isn't always necessarily the same person who's really good at getting a client to come in the door.
Yeah.
I actually in the my family's company, a couple there are actually I'm sure he won't mind if I'm sharing this. My dad is phenomenal at picking up clients. Unbelievable about he would be in the top 0.0 something percent in terms of finding new clients. He's super, super good at it. He's also a good agent and is always going to look out for everybody. But he gets so many clients, he hands it off. But not everybody's as good at that.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing. I do agree with your point. You could have, in theory, if those were perfectly correlated, then I understand. But
No, and so the way I put it is if you're opting for a cheap, this really goes back to the idea, if you're a bad business, you should be driven out of the market.
Yeah.
Unless you're providing a cheaper service to a substitute, right? We still have bad businesses. I live in college towns, right? So
it's an interesting point, and I hadn't really thought about that. So I appreciate you bringing.
That's all I've thought. I'll say that's the extent of what I've thought about it. Is I think it's going to help a lot of people. Absolutely, cheaper homes. Like I think there's going to be a lot of people who benefit. But man, I think about some of the people who aren't and just they don't know it, right? They're not fully. This turns into an asymmetric information problem. But I think that's a different episode. Is asymmetric information.
So we've talked for a while. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation that we've had today. To everybody tuning in, we do try to end on pop culture.
I mean, you talked about Freakonomics. I feel like that's the right one, right? Is the Freakonomics is a maybe we could tie two things in here because Stephen Levitt has retired from Chicago. So Freakonomics, great. I'm going to say great book. It's incredibly controversial. Not everybody loves it, especially in econ. There's a lot of economists that don't like it. But really, like Freakonomics probably has brought more students into economics than any single. I can't imagine anything else that has ever come close to bringing students to economics.
I think
as Freakonomics would have. Like, I mean, that I read it before I switched over.
Yeah, I read it as a young assistant professor. I had just started, and I thought it was a fascinating book.
Yeah, so Freakonomics, the book, great. They've got some follow-ups. They got a podcast y'all might have heard of. Ours is a little bit better, but theirs is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's a fine podcast.
Would appreciate a few more of their listeners.
If we can just grab some of them, that'd be great. We're the low cost Freakonomics in this example.
That might be true.
We're the low price. Matt's burger example. They are the steakhouse burger of economic analysis. We are the pretty good McDonald's $3 burger.
We are the $3 burger.
But Freakonomics it's either Freakonomics or Super Free. I think it's Freakonomics because they also made a Freakonomics movie, and it's in the movie, and I remember it from the movie. So there is a movie version of Freakonomics if you don't want to read the book that talks about it, and it's pretty good. You can actually, if you go to, I think YouTube has a bunch of these scenes. It'll explain this real estate agent problem, and we'll put it in the show notes.
But
I'm going to go with
I'd
that
say
as
if
my
you haven't
example.
read the book, it's worth
Yeah,
the read. The book.
absolutely.
I'll bring up one. I actually just went onto my YouTube and typed in
Okay.
principles because I knew I had a bunch of them. Um, there's a Friends. I did a series on economic lessons from Friends, and there's one I have where bad employee behavior. And a lot of it ties down to principal agent problem, right?
Yeah.
What we talked about as employees, they didn't want to. There's a different one I have where Kendall from Secession was a bad CEO and was really not trying to represent the company's interests, which he legally was bound to. But once again, unless you can prove it, you can try to do something else. So a couple different options there. We'll put the links in there. One, Rachel and Joey are bad employees and in Friends. And I mean, one time Rachel mentions if a customer does something wrong, what should you do? You give them a sneeze muffin. That is not what the owner of the shop wants you to do, is to sneeze on a muffin and then give it to somebody. But it made her feel good. And her incentives were not perfectly aligned with the owner of the coffee shop or with others.
That's great. I love that. So I got one for you. I searched principal agent problem on Econ Media Library. So I'll share this one with you. I think you'll really appreciate this. It is a stand-up piece by Wanda Sykes.
Okay.
Matt, you have nephews, nieces?
Yes.
Yeah, you love them, right?
Sure.
But you treat them much differently than you treat your own kids.
Yes.
Yes, because they're not my kids. So Wanda Sykes has a great stand-up piece where she's talking about like how she treats her nephews much different than her own kids. Her own kids, she wants to make sure that they're eating healthy, going to bed at a decent hour. But that if it's her nephew's kids, like who cares? Load them up with sugar. You're sending them back to your sister or brother's house later. It doesn't matter if they go to bed at a normal time. They can do whatever they want. And so it's a really great. I forgot about this until we talked about it. It's like a 40-second clip of just this idea that, and I think any of us who have like grandparents and grandkids, like it's the exact same. Drop your kids off at grandma's house. We hope grandma takes care of them, and grandma just pumps them full of sugar and gives them back to you.
Very cool. Very cool. So I have not seen that, so I look forward to watching that one.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Everybody, check these out in the show notes. So, well, it was great to catch up again, Jadrian. You have a little bit of it left.
I just got a little bit left, but I still see the sun outside, so I'm going to sit outside and drink the rest of it.
Mine all long gone. So it was great to catch up. Everybody, thank you again for tuning in. We appreciate all of you listening. We've appreciated all of the comments and the 5-star reviews. Please continue to do that.
Please leave more.
It means a lot. It helps get other people to see this. But no, thank you to everybody. And until next time.
Cheers, Matt.
Cheers.